Magenta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party will be supporting this bill to the Select Committee. Obviously, we very much are in support of keeping Kiwibank in public ownership. The campaign against National's planned asset sales last term was a huge focus for the Green Party because we understand the value of keeping assets that have been built up over generations by New Zealanders in the hands of New Zealanders so that they can all benefit in the future. And in the case of our government-owned bank, Kiwibank, it's incredibly important, not only because it's a state-owned asset. I mean, we have other state-owned enterprises which don't necessarily return the same benefits, strategic benefits to New Zealand. Like, for example, we have a state-owned commercial television station, which doesn't really make sense. It would make sense to have a television station that actually provided public broadcasting, but owning a television station for the purposes of returning a commercial return doesn't necessarily make as much sense. I mean, I personally would support public broadcasting on television, which this government has completely killed, and we probably won't get back as long as they're in power. But Kiwibank is incredibly important because we've had a long problem in New Zealand of a lack of competitiveness in the banking sector because of the big four Australian banks, which had a very cozy relationship, didn't compete on price, and of course that all contributed to, great for them, huge profits, leaving New Zealand, sucked out of New Zealand, back to Australia. And of course, that contributes to our current account deficit, the largest share of which is our investment income deficit. And so having the state-owned bank has been incredibly important for New Zealand to ensure that we aren't losing all of that profit overseas. Some of it is staying here in New Zealand. And I must comment as well that Kiwibank's a great bank. It's kind of like Air New Zealand. Like I'm a client of Kiwibank, and I actually have never had better service from a commercial bank. So I think it's doing a great job for its customers. It's doing a great job introducing competition to the banking sector here in New Zealand, and that's important to our economy. And so it's critically important that we retain public ownership because we are too small. When the national government put up the state-owned energy companies for partial privatization, of course we saw it was impossible to be sure that the private owners would be here in New Zealand. So if Kiwibank is not kept in public ownership, there's an incredible risk, a huge risk, very likely risk, that we would see Kiwibank slowly becoming yet another foreign-owned bank, which is not what we need. Now, this bill, I've said we'll support to Select Committee, because although we support the aim of the bill, I think it will be interesting in the Select Committee to tease out whether or not this bill is the best way to achieve that aim. And I can see some potential issues with the way in which the bill has been drafted. In particular, it does seem to tie Kiwibank's future to New Zealand Post, which may not be the best way for Kiwibank to arrange its business and for us to keep it in public ownership here in New Zealand. But I'm open to this bill. I think it's a worthy endeavor, and I do think that it will be interesting if it makes it to the Select Committee to see exactly how it could be improved, potentially, to ensure that we do achieve the aim, which is so incredibly important, of keeping Kiwibank in public ownership. And I think that politically, at least, National has realized that they can't sell Kiwibank. That would be incredibly unpopular. They went ahead with the partial privatization of the energy companies, even though that was incredibly unpopular, didn't make fiscal sense, didn't make economic sense, didn't make strategic sense in the long term, but they went ahead and did it because it was an election promise that they campaigned on. But I do think that the victory for all those who stood up and supported the Keep Our Assets campaign, who voted in the referendum, is that we won't see further privatizations of incredibly important assets like Kiwibank. So there is a partial political victory there for all those people who stood up in the Keep Our Assets campaign.